I wanted to start by talking about the iceberg. And we use this metaphor of the iceberg to think about what's visible and what's maybe more substantial that's beneath the waterline. The idea that it's only the surface that's visible, but our emotional intelligence lets us connect with what's deeper below the water. And yet it seems like the surface is what gets so much of the attention. And I suspect that sometimes people are confused, thinking that this visible little bit is the real thing. And I think part of our work is about figuring out how to access what's deeper, how to see what's deeper, to see what's really driving us and others, and to remember this larger story. Well, I remember you told a story about when you got hit by a swing. And that story has stuck with me for many years. And I'm wondering if you would be willing to share that to help us understand how it is that you came to see that what's on the surface isn't what's really important.
I'd be delighted to share that story, Josh. The reality of the story, the lesson from the story really came from somebody who said to me after many years, well, Anabel, if you had a magic wand, would you undo this? And I thought for a moment about that, and I said, no, I would not. So here's the story. On July 3rd, it's my mother's birthday, and I'm at my grandmother's house. I had begged the night before to stay with Grandma and Grandpa. Not so much because of Grandma and Grandpa, because I had all these aunts and uncles that I could play with. My mother came from a family of 8, and there was an uncle who was exactly 6 months older than I. We were pretty much buds. So I'm 3.5 at this point in time. We'd have great fun the night before. We had Grandpa up 6 times telling us to be quiet or else. We had a great time chitting and chatting and playing. So on this particular day, Grandma was busy in the kitchen. She was making a cake for my mother and Aunt Berta, who's 12, and my Aunt Josephine, and my Uncle Lyle, who, as I mentioned, is just 6 months older than I am. We're all outside. We're riding stick horses, and we've been picking berries. And we asked Grandma if we can go across the street to the high school and play on the playground with all the playground equipment. Grandma gave us an emphatic, absolutely, positively no. And then she went in the house. Well, you know what happens when adults say no to children. So we were weaving our way in and out of the bushes, and we found a way to get across the street without Grandma seeing us. And it was fun for about 5 minutes. We had an absolutely great time running around, screaming. The older kids, the high school kids, were doing preliminary July the 4th works, firecrackers were popping, etc. And then because I was fascinated by the firecrackers, was not paying attention to what I was doing. And I walked right in front of a swing, old-fashioned metal swing, in which a high school student was sitting, and wham, it hit me right in the face. Pandemonium broke out. Everybody was screaming, everybody was hollering, I was screaming. Blood was gushing. The older kids ran across the street to get Grandpa and Grandma. She came tearing out of the house. I'm not sure whatever happened to that cake she was baking. And she had a blanket. She grabbed me up. She wrapped me in the blanket. Grandpa jumped in the 1935 Ford, I think it was, and off we went to town, which was about 10 or 12 miles away. And in the meantime, blood is gushing. My face is a mess. My nose is barely holding on. My tongue has been cut off, not totally, but it's being held on by a little teeny stripe. These bones are broken, and it is a disaster. I do not remember much about the operation itself. I do remember afterwards My head was swathed in bandages. I know that there were hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of stitches to put me all back together again. I know that I spent about 6 weeks living on liquids, orange juice and apple juice, and my favorite of all, chocolate milkshakes. And when the bandages finally came off, what happened was every time I met somebody, the first words out of their mouth, whether it was an adult or a teenager or a kid, oh my gosh, what happened to you? What happened to you? I began to feel and think and believe that I must be very ugly indeed. And it had a very profound effect on who I was from that moment on. I decided I had to be the perfect student, the perfect child, so that I could just submerge into the background and no one would pay any attention to me. I lived in my books. I had always loved books, but now they became not only my friends, but my saving grace. That's where I went, where people would say, well, where's Anabel? She's got her nose in a book. That terribly scarred nose, she's got it in a book. And as life continued, I really became, I was an introvert already, but now I become an extreme introvert. And American society is so focused on beauty. We are so focused on the skin deep and what it means. And so there were two things that I learned out of this experience. Now, I did not learn them when I was 5. I did not learn them when I was 10. I don't think I even learned them when I was 15. But when I became an adult, I began to see the power of adversity and that it always leaves us with a gift. And in this particular instance, the gift that I was given was to recognize and understand and appreciate that it is not how we look on the outside. It doesn't matter. At this point, folks, I'm 80, almost 81, and who cares? Who cares whether I have scars or not? But while I'm learning and growing, I discover that what I really care about is not the jewelry and not the hairdo and not the rings and not the beauty, but who was I building on the inside? Would I be building a person that other people would want to interact with? Would I be building a person that people want to be friends with? Would I be building a person who could help change education? Would I be building a person that would perhaps in some small way change the world? And so I discovered what was really, really, really important is who are we on the inside? And do we work every single solitary day to try to make ourselves a little bit better than we were the day before?
Annabelle, I always wanted to ask you, what did your mom and grandma say about this?
You know what? This was probably a very interesting thing, Josh, because they didn't talk about it. They actually didn't know how to talk about it. And I think that's really one of the powers of emotional intelligence. It helps us to talk about the hard things. So for them, the accident happened and it was over with and that was it. And we just went on. I don't remember ever having a conversation with either my grandmother or my mother or my father about any of this experience. So it was totally me that was dealing with it. And hopefully the tenets and the concepts of emotional intelligence will make a difference where we can talk about the things that hurt and talk about how to ease that pain and the scars that we feel on the inside.
I can just imagine you when you were 4 or 8 or 10 and having these big feelings about this pain that you had and the way people were reacting to you, and not really having anybody to talk to about that. It sounds like it would be very difficult. It must have felt really confusing and overwhelming.
It was confusing. It was overwhelming. It created scars in my heart and soul that I think are still there, Josh. Although I have worked beyond them, they're still there. If I open up, this memory, then I start to think about it. And as you can see, I get a little emotional because it was so powerful and so intense and so emphatic.
And so you got asked this question, which you've in turn asked many people about their adversities. Would you go back and change this story? And I think you said the answer, but why wouldn't you change it?
I think at 4 I would have, at 5 I would have, at 8 I would have, maybe even at 10. But by the time I reached those adult years and was beginning to work on who I was, then I discovered the gift that had been given to me, the gift of paying attention to the inside of people. So not only my inside was I paying attention to, but I was also looking at other people and paying attention to the inside of them as well. And there I discovered is where the real richness of relationships exists, is the inside speaking to the inside.
And as we think about the world as it is now, unfortunately, it seems like the attention to the outside has become even louder. And I don't know that we can blame social media, but it certainly seems to be an amplifier. So how can we change this emphasis? And how can we help each other learn this lesson in a less painful way than you did?
My most recent experience, Josh, has really emphasized for me the power of relationships. So as you know, I've been going through some health challenges, which I am not going to go into at this particular point in time. But I would share with you that because of the emphasis that I put on relationships, I cannot tell you how many people have come out of the woodwork, have come out of the environment, have come out of the neighborhood, who have come out of years ago and who have heard, Anabel, you're sick. What can we do to provide you support and help? I cannot emphasize enough the power of relationships and how they contribute to our lives and help us help us to become the person we want to be.
So here we are at the end of what's been a year of intense adversity for many people. And I suspect many of us would like to just fast forward to the point where we can look back and say, oh, yes, I got some gifts from that adversity. But right now it might be very hard to find them, whether that's for ourselves or for our clients and colleagues. There's just so much suffering right now. And as we're on this cusp of the year, what's your advice for moving into 2021?
Not to wish your life away. It's really easy to say, oh, I wish COVID were over. I wish this piano recital were over. I wish this book report were done. I wish this conference were over. We have to take the moments we've been given. And the older I become, the more I appreciate those moments. And we have to live each and every one to the absolute fullness. So we have to enjoy those moments we're on Zoom with each other. We have to enjoy those moments we're eating a delicious meal and maybe sharing it on Zoom with somebody else. We have to enjoy the laughter that comes into our lives. We have to enjoy spending a few minutes with our dog. We have to enjoy the moments. Don't give up the moments, waiting for things to be better.
Thank you, Anabel. I appreciate you taking time to share with us. And people who are watching, I know Anabel would love to hear more questions from you and hear what you're doing to find the gifts in adversity. Anabel says, every adversity has a gift, And I add, P.S., it's damn hard to unwrap.
So true.
I think my big wish right now is that as we go into this new year and another time of uncertainty, that we can bring these skills more and more into our own selves and practice them in a way that supports others to do that. And that's something you've role modeled for us. And I appreciate that.
Sending you love. Bye,
Bye,
John.
everybody. Thank you.